Hear me now? Take a break from me. How's everybody's day though? Good. I thought I was losing my mind. So I'm using this thing called Restream. If the version I'm using is free. It's not the greatest, but that's why that's how I am right now, live streaming because my phone's acting up right now, and YouTube, my phone's overheating, so I gotta get right now a break around 9 o'clock. Thank you. I hope your day is going great. So right now, around 9 o'clock, I'll go back to my phone and go live there because I'll get more views there as well. And I drink some of this. I prefer diet, but then have some. Uh, Let me see if it'll let me play another screen. Nope. Because I'm trying to share. Yeah, I seen it, but I haven't gone on TikTok today. Nope, that's not it. And you see it now? So to go pro on here is $16 a month. Can't afford that right now. I wanted something like that, but I want to make my screen big. I want to make my screen bigger. It is. Let me go to my thing and cancel that one. Thank you, Sean B. Yeah, I'm trying to delete it now, guys. Sean B's the best. How you make something? I guess this is the best I can do. I just deleted it. So how many subs I got now? That I don't know if the, I want to go to regular YouTube finally.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thank you for joining us for our live coverage here on Law and Crime.
Can y'all hear the YouTube?
Diddy Combs criminal sex crimes trial. A lot going on today in court. We have a great panel.
Let me make the thing bigger so y'all can.
We're going to be taking your questions for the next hour, not only about what's happening in court today, but what has happened over the past several days, what's happened in the past several weeks. What do you think about the case at this point? If you have a question, submit it on YouTube. We're going to answer it in real time. I am made of questions, because let me tell you about what happened today. And then we're going to get Elizabeth Milner on, who's been in that courtroom, to give us a play-by-play too. But the testimony today was regarding the alleged break-in at Kid Cudi's house, the alleged firebombing of his car. I've said it before, I said it again. Kid Cudi, very important witness in this case to establish some of the underlying crimes for the overall racketeering charge. So arson that came out of testimony today. You had this member of the Los Angeles Police Department saying that there was an Escalade registered to Bad Boy Records that was found near the crime scene, near the scene of the break-in. There was some very interesting cross-examination, too, that we'll get into as well. A lot of discussion about DNA that was found on this glass bottle, the Molotov cocktail.
I'll bring it up a little bit.
Let's see. Used in the firebombing of his car, the alleged firebombing of his car, that it belonged to a female contributor. Not entirely sure who that is. Big back and forth between the prosecution
much better
regarding fingerprint cards and whether they were apparently destroyed. Defense objected to this. They objected to this line of questioning because they said it now puts in the minds of the jury that it looks like Combs or his team is responsible for destroying this piece of evidence. There was also discussion about a glove that wasn't tested for DNA. Was it maybe worn by the person who allegedly threw the Molotov cocktail? And then right before they went to lunch, a celebrity stylist gets on the stand. Deontay Nash worked for Diddy and Cassie. And I will tell you, based on just my reading of the transcript, what personality this guy has. And also quite relevant to Cassie Ventura's testimony. Alleged victim number one in this case, really, really important. So without further ado, I want to bring on Elizabeth Milner, law and crimes reporter who has been in that courtroom every day for testimony. Elizabeth, so great to see you. I have to start with Deontay Nash, okay, because I can feel the personality through the court updates. Talk to us about, this was again, right before the lunch break, called by the prosecution. What did he say, and how was his testimony relevant to Cassandra Ventura?
Well, I'm not going to lie, Jesse. I absolutely love everything about Deontay Nash being on the witness stand. He's funny, he's sassy, and look, when I see it, if I were to see an exhibit photo of myself and I looked in beautiful in this glamorous headshot, I would tell the entire courtroom too that I looked fabulous and stunning, and there was just this eruption of laughter inside the courtroom. And so Deontay Nash definitely at some points during his testimony, the personality is brought out, but he is there to talk about a lot of substance too, and that is just about his working relationship with Cassie Ventura as well as even Diddy. He styled both of them. However, he did have kind of a better friendship and relationship with Cassie, and he witnessed a lot, according according to his time, or according to his
Yeah, I see
testimony
you here,
during his time while
Camden.
he had worked as a stylist with her. And so we're introduced to Deontay Nash around 12 o'clock-ish, right before the lunch break. He was the last witness who was called before we went to lunch. And so he was kind of explaining just how he had started working with Diddy and Cassie. He started off as an intern for Derek Roche, and Derek Roche was actually Diddy's stylist. And when Deontay is on the witness stand, Jesse, he's not even referring to him as Diddy or Sean Combs. He calls him Puff or Puffy. That is what he calls him by, and that's normally the name that he's familiar with. And so we do see that exhibit photo of Deontay Nash. It was a glamour shot of him, and of course, he said that he looked amazing and fabulous, and I'm sure the transcript read just that, but just being inside the courtroom, it definitely was kind of a good, funny, highlighted moment, and then it got more serious from there. So he was explaining that he had worked with Diddy and Cassie from 2008 to 2018, so about a 10-year period.
That was a
Then
long
we
time.
get into the 2009 to 28 time frame, which is a long time, but Maureen Comey, who did the questioning under the direct examination, was essentially asking some foundational questions just about how much time Deontay spent with Cassie, and he said he spent pretty much every single day with Cassie. He said he saw Diddy and Cassie together, though, about once a week, but that's still a
Diddy
pretty
screwed.
often time. And then he was asked, what were the names that
There's no
Diddy
way.
referred to Cassie as?
Diddy
So
goes to
first,
one. I'll be
Deontay was
back
like,
in a
oh,
second,
baby
guys.
girl, Cass,
Well, that's
Cassie.
here.
But then he said that Diddy would also refer to her as the B word. He would call her an SLUT. He would call her a hoe. But he said it's the B word that was his favorite word to use in reference to his own girlfriend, that being Cassie. And he said, he being Deontay, said that Diddy would call Cassie an outright hoe, an outright SLUT. And I'm sorry, guys, I know I have to be very careful with just the words that I can say on air. But Deontay explained that when Diddy would call her these names and when he would use these words against her, that
I'm back.
Cassie would be sad. She would be depressed about this name calling. Deontay went on to explain that Diddy threatened Cassie a number of times, threatened to release her
Yeah, stay
sex
here,
tapes, send those
guys.
sex tapes to her parents, threatened to beat Cassie's behind, and it drove Cassie essentially crazy. She would cry, she would stay in the house. Deontay explained that Cassie would essentially cocoon up when Diddy would just call her these names, and Diddy threatened not to release her music, something that the government has talked about at length throughout a bunch of different witness testimony. And around this time frame from 2012, 2013-ish, again, when Deontay was still working with Diddy and Cassie, Deontay explained that Diddy threatened to do something to Cassie's parents. Now, they didn't elaborate what this threat was, but I'm sure once we get back from the lunch break, they'll kind of expand more on
Diddy's
just
an
that. But it
asshole. That's
seems
what he
like,
is.
from Deontay's point of view, that Diddy threatened Cassie a number of times. Diddy even threatened Cassie and Deontay that Cassie couldn't go out with Deontay and that she needed to bring her behind home, essentially, and that Cassie again would be referred to as the B word, and that Cassie would have to essentially do whatever Diddy said, whether it was how her appearance looked, whether her hair was down a certain way,
I'm
whether
happy
it was
he's in
up a certain
prison.
way. And so I think as
Or
far
they
as
lock
the
his ass
direct
up and throw away the
examination
key.
goes, yes, we did have a funny moment at the beginning of testimony, but really just getting into just kind of the weight of the testimony, it seems that Deontay is kind of, in essence, kind of giving more credibility to a lot of the other witness testimony, just about how mean and potentially forceful Diddy was against her.
Right, when you're talking about violence, threats, verbal abuse, it's all important for force, fraud, coercion, right? The underlying elements for sex trafficking. And also goes to the larger theme of why Cassie didn't walk away, why she didn't fight back, why didn't she report Sean Combs? It's a big issue in this case. And talking about that power dynamic is something that's already come up in the past.
R. Kelly's bad,
This is
he's
something
even
that's going to
worse.
explore with his testimony. There was a lot of
R. Kelly
testimony
was
this
only given
morning
30
regarding
years.
Kid Cudi, because Kid Cudi had taken the stand last week,
So imagine.
said that he had this relationship with Cassandra Ventura, and then was retaliated against by Sean Combs, that his house was broken into, his car was torched. And I got to ask you, Elizabeth, based on the testimony today from, I believe, members of Los Angeles Police Department and the fire department, it seems like that might have happened, that his house was broken into and that his car was actually firebombed, right? I mean, what were some of the highlights regarding that testimony about whether this in fact did happen?
Yeah, well, we heard a lot of evidence this morning, especially with the first witness that was called to the stand, and that was Officer Christopher Ignacio. He does work with the LAPD. And he was just explaining his response to the December 2011, this happened December 22nd of 2011.
I hope he never gets
The
on.
response to the break-in at Kid Cudi's home. And so it was just interesting kind of hearing his perspective just from an evidentiary standpoint, from a police perspective. And so he says that he was dispatched around 8:20 a.m. that day about a possible suspect kind of staring down near and around the house. And so he responded, and when he responded, what did he see? He noticed right off the bat a black Escalade. And it's interesting that that was one of the first things he said when he was talking about his response, because what did we learn just yesterday when Capricorn Clark was on the stand? That Diddy, Ruben, and Capricorn Clark, according to her testimony, traveled down to Kid Cudi's house in what? A black Escalade. And so Officer Ignacio was explaining that he didn't notice the passengers inside the vehicle because there was so much heavy tint on the windows. But what he did notice was a particular license plate. And he said that that license plate number stuck out to him. He remembered that license plate number. He explained that while they had arrived to the house, his partner had jumped over the fence to kind of let him in to the door. So they opened the door. No one was home at the time, but what they did notice was some unwrapped gifts. And it's interesting because while Kid Cudi was testifying, he said that there were gifts unwrapped in the kitchen area. These were fancy gifts, kind of like Chanel bags and watches, that type of thing.
He got money.
Then later on, more detectives arrived to this area. But it's interesting, Jesse, because he was explaining that, excuse me, he was explaining that when they had exited the home, they noticed that same exact black Escalade kind of driving back towards the hill, driving at a slower pace, around 10 to 15 miles per hour. He said around the first time he saw the black Escalade that they were driving off fast, which I think also goes to verify Capricorn Clark's explanation, or Capricorn Clark's testimony yesterday, where she was explaining how she, Ruben, and Diddy had all spotted Kid Cudi's car. They chased him and then excuse me, later return. And so right before the direct examination ended, we see this exhibit photo, and I think that the prosecution kind of did a big like aha moment here, because we see the DMV vehicle registration. And I know you kind of spoiled it anyway, Jesse, but that vehicle was registered to Bad Boy Productions, Inc.
Bad Boy.
And it was the exact same license plate that Officer Ignacio had first spotted. And so that was the big moment just from his testimony. Obviously, under the cross-examination, it was really picked apart just as far as his response goes to investigating this break-in. Whether or not that there were dead ends around the Hollywood Hills neighborhood, and maybe that was an explanation as to why the black Escalade was seen again. And I think, when Brian Steele was doing the cross-examination, he was poking holes where holes needed to be poked, right? He was asking questions as far as why a bolo response wasn't put out, why no arrests were made, why nothing was charged beyond just trespassing. It was no burglary charge or no robbery charge, any of that sort. He didn't spot a car chasing another car, and he didn't hear about a kidnapping in this matter, and that there was no property disturbed, even though there was gifts open that Kid Cudi says weren't open when he had left his home. And so those were the big highlights for his testimony. Then we get into arson investigator Lance Jimenez, and I think Lance Jimenez's testimony was pretty interesting today, because he is an arson investigator, and he was really kind of explaining just the ins and outs of investigating this type of firebomb or car bomb, but particularly this Molotov cocktail that was lodged into Kid Cudi's home. According to him, he says that he observed, when he had responded to the call, that he had observed this car parked close to the garage, and then he saw this black Porsche 911. He saw that there was a cutout roof inside the Porsche, something that we've all seen from those exhibit photos. And he said that his initial hypothesis was the engine wasn't damaged, the back seats weren't necessarily damaged, the weather was good that day, so this wasn't a natural accident. This wasn't because of the weather or anything like that.
He'll die in
prison. Believed, especially after smelling things like gasoline coming from that glass bottle, that
if he's convicted, he's fucked.
Cocktail. And so we see a whole bunch of different exhibits. We see exhibits of Kid Cudi's front door. We see exhibits of Kid Cudi's driveway with the black Porsche there. It was burned. We see the roof, and Jimenez has said that he believes that that roof was actually cut intentionally. We see the interior of Kid Cudi's Porsche, where you can see a glass bottle. You can see a handkerchief over into the console area, which is kind of like this designery silky cloth material. And he believed that that was kind of the root and the damage as far as what had happened. And so he summed up his conclusion, because we saw a whole bunch of different exhibits too that I'm sure we'll get into more later on, Jesse. But his conclusion was that someone took this bottle, put gasoline in it, put a cloth over it, cut the roof out. The cloth fell out whenever the Molotov cocktail was lodged into the roof. And so that fire ended up being contained specifically to the car. Now, he says that he's investigated arson when it comes to Molotov cocktails before. He has a lot of experience. He's been doing this he's been doing arson investigations since the earliest around 2011. So he's been doing this a long time. And he said, surprisingly, that the damage wasn't as bad as he's seen in other instances that involve Molotov cocktails. He explained that it could have been so much worse, where the fire could have just essentially exploded the car, only leaving the frames of the car. The car could have, the fire from the car could have even went over to the house or to the garage area. Like, the damage could have been a lot worse than it actually was. So that was a surprising tidbit that he had said today, where he explained that even though a Molotov cocktail was lodged into the car, and as Kid Cudi had explained while he was testifying that he could not refix the car was beyond repair, that according to investigator Lance Jimenez, that essentially this fire could have been a lot worse. But what's also interesting, Jesse, is that when we start to get into the fingerprints and just the DNA that was collected, essentially the defense thought it was kind of enough for the grounds of a mistrial. Why? Because the government was essentially asking questions as far as whether or not fingerprints were taken inside the car and around the car. But the victim in this case, the victim obviously being Scott Mescudi, aka Kid Cudi, he had someone do fingerprints after the break-in at his home. He submitted these fingerprints over to officials, and officials officially had this fingerprint card. But the thing he was asked, he being investigator Lance Jimenez, was asked by Mary Slavic while he was questioned under direct, did you find this unusual? Because the fingerprint cards were later destroyed. So he was asked, do you find this unusual? Has evidence ever been destroyed before? Obviously, there was going to be an objection from the defense. Obviously, there was going to be a sidebar, because the defense did not want this information to be heard from the jury. So when the jury had to kind of leave the room for a quick break for arguments outside the presence of the jury, they were just really getting into it. And Alexandra Shapiro just got up and was like, we have the ground, or I believe there's enough grounds for a mistrial. And everyone just kind of was like, okay, what is about to happen? And obviously we know that didn't necessarily happen, because another witness was called later on. But it really seemed like the defense was very upset and found this to be extremely prejudicial against their client.
Because it makes the jury believe, the argument is, that someone destroyed the fingerprint cards, and that someone was Sean Combs or a member of his team. And I know that the judge even questioned the prosecutor about why you would even ask questions like this, and at the end told the jury to disregard the commentary about the fingerprint cards. I mean, the genie's, it's already out of the bottle. I mean, they already heard it. Well, they're not supposed to consider it, but they're human beings. Okay, Elizabeth, before I let you go, one more question. So we're taking a bunch of questions.
They convict them either way. So
I have an all-star panel that I'm going to bring on in a minute. But before I do, we have a question from Leg7K that is for you, Elizabeth. The question is, hi, hope all is well. I have a question for Elizabeth Milner. What's her opinion on the jury so far? How are they holding up?
Well, I think the jury is holding up exceptionally well. I think the jury is very much how they've always been. They've been very involved in this case. And by involved, I mean they're taking notes down. They're listening to this testimony. From what I can see of them when I'm sitting inside the gallery, I don't see any heads kind of nodding off, falling asleep, any of that sort. But I'm kind of wondering about the jury myself, whether or not they found this kind of aha moment, the same as us maybe in the press or other members in the gallery, where that big moment where we had seen that defense exhibit about the vehicle registration being to Bad Boy Entertainment or to Bad Boy Incorporated. So as far as I could tell from the jury, they definitely are still very attentive from it, and they're definitely still paying very close attention. I'm probably sure that during that sidebar when the objections were had, they were probably like, what is going on? But for the most part, they're still paying very close attention.
Good, that's what they should be doing. This is going to be a long case, not an easy case for them to sit on. But Elizabeth Milner, thank you so much for coming on, breaking down the ins and outs of the testimony from today, as you do every day. Thanks so much, and I know you have to head back into court.
He's a piece of trash. That's what he is.
Thanks, Jesse.
Oh, my eyes. Wait. in my opinion. I'm not doing the camera read, somebody else was doing it. What game is this? Oh, that's GTA. Did y'all see this? The interview with this
Well,
guy?
his stage name, The Punisher, to the jury, Sheree Hayes, is his real name and one of the few witnesses to give an uncensored look inside Diddy's freak-offs. In 2012, the exotic dancer allegedly received a call from a woman requesting a striptease for someone named Janet, aka Cassie Ventura, and her friends. Hayes says he believes Cassie found him through his getpunished.com website. And at their first meeting, Hayes said Cassie told him her and her husband liked to create a sexy scene, one that her husband would eventually come out to watch. And during that first encounter, Diddy allegedly gave mostly subtle directions. The compensation for that rendezvous, $2,000. Under cross-examination, Hayes testified that Cassie did not appear uncomfortable during their encounters. He, quote, did not get any cues that there was a discomfort with what was going on over the 8 to 12 interactions they all had. Sheree said, The Punisher, Hayes, joins me now, and he's also the author of In Search of Freezer Meat. He joins us now. Sheree, welcome. It's been a week since you testified. First of all, I'm just wondering what the reaction has been like in your life, knowing that this is such a high-profile case, and here you are in the spotlight in this way.
Yeah, it's been like a whirlwind. You know, a constant outreach from media outlets like this, and just friends and family, people from junior high school actually reaching
Really?
out just randomly, you know, to check in and speak up. It's been a very interesting, trying week.
You've reflected, I think, in some time about what your testimony said and what is like in that courtroom. Can you tell me a little bit what it was like to be on that stand a few feet away from Sean Diddy Combs, who you obviously had been around before in these sexual encounters, but he was more of a voyeur at those times. What was it like being in the room in the courtroom?
Yeah, so I have to say, I thought going into it, I was pretty prepared and confident, but literally when I walked in the room, I got complete anxiety. Like my entire body was shaking. Whatever I envisioned or what I thought, because obviously you can't see anything, it was the tension and the magnitude of the moment was much, much deeper. So it was to some degree terrifying. Like I just could not, whatever I envisioned, it was just so much more that I was not mentally prepared.
You know, I mentioned that he was a voyeur during the sexual encounters. You were involved with Cassie Ventura directly in those rooms, as you've testified. Were you ever involved with Sean Diddy Combs? Did you two ever have an interaction in those sexual encounters?
No, actually, not one conversation, not even eye contact.
Really?
Yeah.
Did that surprise you?
Well, it was told to me immediately, like on the first encounter, that I was instructed to not look at him, not acknowledge him, not have any interaction with
By Cassie?
Yeah, by Cassie. So those were the instructions. So I did my best to follow them to the best of my ability because, you know, initially I did not know who they were. And so I just saw it as an opportunity. I see this stunningly beautiful woman and, you know, $2,000 for this type of interaction was, you know, kind of like a no-brainer in terms of it. So I wanted to follow the directions as much as possible. So there was literally no interaction, I didn't even look directly at him.
Because normally you are a dancer, and this was an interaction that would have resulted in sexual intercourse.
Exactly. So,
Okay.
yeah, so this is nuance. It's not something that happens.
Prostitution,
You know,
wow.
I've done thousands of parties. This is the only time I was propositioned with something like this, and it was in such magnitude. Like we're in the Trump Hotel, it's like these huge suites, and you can tell this is a very high-profile couple. So I just wanted to be as professional for the scenario as I would assume was required.
Did you ever travel outside of New York with them?
I did not.
When you were engaged in this encounter and intimate with Cassie Ventura, as you've said on the stand, you were asked about whether you had any notice or any idea how she felt about the interaction, whether she was consenting, whether she was uncomfortable in any way. You testified you did not feel as though she was uncomfortable at all. Can you explain?
Yeah, so there was always, like, before the sexual activity, there was always, like, downtime. So I would be greeted by Cassie, kind of put in a room, and we would have casual conversation, you know.
About how long did that last?
10, 15 minutes, you know, and it would be, you know, consistent. How's work going? How's the parties? How's things? So it seemed like a very cordial, laid back situation. And I actually believed that the scenario was real. It was like her birthday. This was something they were doing as a couple that wasn't normal. I mean, that wasn't their norm. And I honestly thought I was the only person they were engaging with. So I had almost a belief that I was, wow, like this is a cool thing. Like I'm the person they're choosing for this kind of fetish type of environment. And
nothing seemed illegal to you or anything out of sorts?
Not even close. Like I didn't even get any thought of anybody being like under the influence of any drugs or anything. It seems like a very, for the circumstance, everybody was just normally in their right state of mind, and this was just something they did for sexual pleasure.
You never saw any violence?
Nothing close.
You know, interestingly, I mean, you say you haven't seen any violence, you didn't see anyone under the influence of drugs, and you didn't have any idea that she was not consenting in some way. Why do you think you were called to testify?
I'm still trying to figure that out. Like it's after
Really?
the fact. I'm the only thing that I can kind of maybe think is, you know, there was directions, right? It was in my testimony. It was clear that it was him, I guess, somewhat in control. You know, not
so?
overbearingly. I mean, it was said to me this scene we were creating was for her husband, aka him. So the only thing I can say is maybe they were trying to show another element of control. And even though in my case it wasn't forceful or aggressive, but it's still another dynamic that maybe they were trying to establish.
Did you ever see cameras or
I did
anything being
not.
filmed?
I did not. The rooms were always extremely dim and dark, just candlelit. So it was, if there were cameras, it would have to be some sort of infrared, low light scenario because it was very dark in there.
Who paid you?
Always Cassie.
Did you ever see where the money came from?
I did not. Only one time, like I said in my testimony, we were actually engaging in sexual activity, and he threw a stack of $100 bills on the bed. That Cassie turned to him and asked him was everything was fine. And he just said, I'm enjoying it, in so many words. And I know that money was collected after the fact and given to me. So that would be the only scenario where I guess money came directly from him by way of, you know, slamming it on the bed, like almost like how somebody would do at like at a strip club.
How, when you've reflected back on your testimony, do you think that your testimony was helpful to the prosecution or the defense in any way?
I mean, going into it, I always thought that because I saw no violence or any outward aggression, I always wondered if this was more beneficial to the defense. But I don't understand the angle of how they're trying to take my testimony and connect it to what they're trying to prove. You know, it's very nuanced what constitutes a RICO and racketeering, and I don't know enough yet. I haven't heard enough to see if my testimony aligns with what they're trying to prove.
One thing that Cassie said on the stand was that she wanted Diddy to know that people were not disposable. And it almost sounded like she was talking collectively about everyone involved in these sexual encounters and these so-called freak-offs. Did you yourself ever feel as though you were either disposable or that you yourself were being trafficked in some way or prostituted?
No, not trafficked in some way or whatever. There was always pressure in terms of being disposable because obviously I'm there to create something, like a scene, to create an environment. So at times where there was sexual pressure, you know, because it's out of my norm, I did have a feeling of, okay, I'm one scenario where if I don't perform the right way, if I don't create the right ambiance, then maybe I won't get called back. But that's the most pressure that I had. There was no indication of I really believe they were just a happy couple, and this was a sexual fetish that they had.
Do you ever see them be affectionate during these freak offs together?
I did not. They would never actually interact in front of me. There was like kind of a cue where if he needed to speak to her or have some sort of direction with her, he would just stand up and leave the room. And if she saw that, she would follow him out. They would be gone 5-10 minutes. Then she'll come back and we'll resume for the most part. But no interaction in front of me. No even conversation other than his directions, which were subtle: move the light, turn your body, maybe put more oil. Those type of gestures in communication.
You said you wanted to, after your testimony, feel at peace with what you've said. Knowing what you do now about what Cassie Ventura has said about how she's felt about these freak offs, what would you say to her if you could?
I would apologize. I would apologize because I had no idea, no indication what she was going through. And if, obviously my involvement kind of furthered her suffering, so just me knowing that as a man, being raised by a single mom and a grandma, just the thought of partaking in a scenario where a woman is possibly being abused is tough to hear. So,
That's
I would just apologize to her and, tell her that I was really remorseful and regret if I contributed to a bad experience for her.
Sheree Hayes, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
wow, but it's not his fault though. It's that scumbag's fault. Yo, guys, I'll be back in a few. I'm gonna let my phone charge. When my phone charges, I'll come back. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. I'll be back. Thank you, Sean B. Thank you, Candor Green. I'll be back in a few. Bye. Thank you for joining us.